As I start recording this video, we're the 22nd of June 2023, and I have worked a little bit to prepare this video, not very rigorously, but I have a plan, a structure of points that I intend to talk about. So I intend to talk about the Zeitgeist, the spirit of the times, individual virtue, civic virtue, a little bit of a personal talk, libertarianism, and intellectual life in general. But I will begin by showing this. So I know broadly what I intend to talk about, but I will improvise nonetheless on some point. I received this book today. The English, they are great as always. Ecology is a conservative right-wing business. It's not a business precisely, but yeah. And we live in a global village, so there's only one planet, and through the development of the modern means of communication and the internet especially, step by step, progressively, that's a continuous process, mankind is becoming or will become at some moment aware of the fact that we live on the same planet and that there is only one community, and the scientific reason is simply that there is only one universe, only one set of laws in physics, chemistry, the earth sciences, biology, but then eventually in all the so-called social sciences, which include sociobiology, anthropology, psychology, and then economics, etc., sociology, etc., there is the laws are the same for everyone. But in order to become aware of this, it requires knowledge, effort, access to information, interest, etc. But we live in a time where a world consciousness is emerging, because through the medium of the internet, information coming from anywhere on this planet can be accessed in real time. And whenever someone speaks on the internet, he or she thinks, that's a Hegelian trick, the person who speaks believes or has in mind that he speaks to a specific audience, his followers, or people who share the same ideas if he is interested in a specific intellectual topic, scientific topic, politics, hobbies of whatever kind. But actually the information is made public, and potentially anyone who has an access to the internet can access this information, and the truth is the same for all. This is not a book about philosophy, although it's a philosophical treatise on economics, but I've been reading this recently. Mises reminds that the specific characteristic of reason and of rational beings, human beings, is that they can not only they act, but they can agree on rational statements and assertion, because precisely reason is that which is can potentially be shared by every rational agent. So all rational humans, an sich, all humans are rational, but it requires development, education, effort, willingness to reach a level where people are willing and are capable of understanding rational truths. If they are expressed simply, anyone can understand them. If the person has no psychological limitations, neurological limitations, etc. Yeah. Yeah, so when people speak on the internet, most of them believe that they speak to a specific audience, but actually, potentially, it can be accessed by anyone, and if what is being said is relevant, interesting, true, in ordinary sense, it is true for everyone. But truth precisely is not a fixed set of proposition or statements or facts or immutable transcendent order beyond the daily, ordinary, earthly occurrences. Truth is a process, it's an unfolding. So the false, the deception is a moment of the process of the unfolding of truth, because precisely truth consists in extracting itself from that which is false, but precisely because the false is a moment of the process of the unfolding of the truth, it is no longer false because it's a moment of a process. Like example, I will not take this example because maybe I will take Aphrodite. To carve a statue, it's not made of marble, but to carve a statue out of a block of marble, the truth, the end result, the purpose that the sculptor had in mind here, it's not made by the sculptor, it's a copy, but the purpose, the intention that the sculptor had in mind when he produced a statue is the end result, but the truth is the entire process coming from the block of marble. Here it's not marble, but in classical sculpture, the block of marble and the work on the marble and the shaping of the materials to extract the form and to produce the work of art. The truth is the process of bringing forth what is aimed at. The truth is not, it's not just the end product. Of course, that's the goal, that's the aim, that's the purposefully aimed result. But the truth is the process of bringing itself into being. Yeah, it's a movement. But here it's a little bit complicated because in a more ordinary sense there are things which are true and things which are false, but this is a limiting and limited view of philosophical and religious truth. Reality is a process. Yeah. And so we live in a global village, and an age of surveillance as well, the age of surveillance capitalism, the death of private life, and no place to hide. So we live in a village. One of the characteristics of villages is that everyone inhabits the same place. Here the global village is just a very vast, extended, geographically imposing and very populated village, but eventually, through the process of gathering data on the internet, all the data are collected and they can be accessed not by everyone, but they are brought into the collective mind, let us say. The wealth of data, information collected by mankind since humans think, one might say. So whatever people do in their banking transactions, their email, their search, their interactions online or even in private, since in more developed countries there are cameras pretty much everywhere in public places. it's a process, but eventually all the data and all the information, in the good sense, namely scientific information, cultural achievements, discoveries, works of art, scientific theories, etc., are already being made available, and whenever there is an improvement, it is made available almost instantly through the publication of books, articles, conferences, etc. But also the private data, they are being collected, and the solution, as of now, to this problem is simply one potential solution is to live in a state of constant paranoia, of being watched or being observed or being spied upon, an attempt to escape from the panopticon, as Bentham, the English philosopher of the early 19th century, would say. That's a possibility, but actually, and it will be connected with what I intend to say about ethics, is that for the people who may be worried about this, the goal, the ideal, is to behave in one's everyday life as if you were being observed, because most of the time you are being observed, whether you are conscious of this or not. But to behave ethically means, it doesn't mean to abolish private life completely, but to behave as if you were being watched by some sort of the moral consciousness of the human community. We are not yet at this point, but it will happen eventually. And this process of bringing into being a world consciousness, here we are the early we are the month of June 2023. I don't know as of now how long it will take. It might take many months, many years, I don't know, but it will happen eventually. And a name which can be given to this coming into being of a world consciousness can be envisioned as being the mind of God, in a way. So here I share complex and relevant and important information with others. One way of behaving and finding psychological stability in this internet age is to try not to live in a state of constant paranoia, but to try to adjust your behavior so that it might be I wouldn't say acceptable, but at least how should I explain this? What the internet brings about, it has already been the case for many years, more than a decade, but it will only intensify with the passing months and years, as long as it's not done consciously. Maybe people are being judged, living people, dead people. It's the internet, in a way, brings about a cosmic trial, one might say. All the crimes or the wrongdoings or the errors or the mistakes of the past are being judged, and all the actions of the present living people are being judged in real time by people who do not necessarily always have the legitimacy or the intelligence or the experience or the wisdom, or sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Then what is legitimate? This is a philosophical question, but people are being judged. They judge others and they are being judged. This is what happens. And as of now, what I can say is, I intend to talk about this, this is how things are. Then there's the question how to react to this state of affair, whether you enjoy this or not. It's not always very pleasant, but first try to become aware of this and then act accordingly. And here a piece of advice that I can give: young people, here for me young means younger than 21 years old, young people, I can give a piece of advice, they should not express themselves on the internet. Maybe some exceptional cases like artists, etc. But young people, they should not talk on the internet. Sometimes they should not even have access to the internet because there are dubious things on the internet. And women, they should not talk about controversial topics. Yeah, that's my view, because I will not delve into the metaphysics of gender, but yeah. So a good piece of advice that I can give to the people who will watch this, I don't know when they will watch this, but if you are younger than at least 21 years old, it could be even more, but if you are younger than 21 years old, try not to express yourself on the internet. If you are a woman, do not talk about controversial topics. Do not expose your romantic life, because it might have negative consequences. So that's the piece of advice that I can give. Yeah. And yeah, try to, whoever you are, try to act and speak responsibly. It's not always easy, because people are under a lot of pressure. There's a lot of frustration, anger, negative emotions. Sometimes people just want to lash out and express themselves. It's part of human nature, a need to express oneself, even in spite of the negative content of one's mind or psyche. It can be understood, and yeah, but eventually yeah, I will not, this is not what I intend to talk about, so that's just the introduction. I've already talked a lot about this, but yeah, I've understood this, so I try to share with others discoveries about the world in which we live in the 21st century, which have taken me a very long time to understand, although I'm very intelligent and knowledgeable, but it has taken me a long time. So now I can give good pieces of advice to people who are less experienced, less mature on this aspect, less old. Yeah, I've said what I wanted to say. Yeah, so now I will read some of my notes about the Zeitgeist. That's a German expression to mean the spirit of the times, which is the circulation, the movement, the development of ideas, if I simplify to the utmost. So, the totality of world knowledge is being made available on the internet. That's one of the very good aspects. The totality of world knowledge, all the past knowledge, discoveries, wisdom, experiences, testimonies, productions, artistic, intellectual productions, either they are made available for free, or if they are for sale in the forms of books or private content which has to be bought, etc., they are made accessible nonetheless very easily. Yeah, so the totality of world knowledge. So we live a fascinating era in the 21st century. I understood this personally more than 5 years ago, but it has taken me a long time to realize that most people are not aware of this, because once you become aware of this, you spend a whole lot of time, I mean, if you are interested at least, studying, and because there are fascinating things. There are conferences by great, intelligent, sometimes exceptionally brilliant individuals, which are on all topics: physics, economics, history, psychology, neurosciences, philosophy, all sorts of topics. So here I will promote the videos that I've published about home economics. I have produced and shared documents which show they are incomplete, they are imperfect, and I have been working recently to rearrange them and improve them. So that's why I will not show them in this video, because I've already done this, and I am in the process, as of now, June 2023, the process of improving them to make them more intelligible, more rigorous, more serious in a way. But I have already shared documents which show in a very simple way, simplified but enlightening in my view way, the view of the totality of a human society. So it can help classify, order. It's like a map. It's very simple, but the purpose is to simplify and to help connect the dots and situate the piece of information and the data in a rigorous way, in a good sense. Yeah. So yeah, also the consequence of this is that we are living in revolutionary times. The reason, simplified to the utmost, is public speech, politicians, scholars, journalists, figures of authority. Public speech is being discredited, rendered questionable, if not downright dubious. I mean, it has always been dubious and questionable, but people are slowly starting to realize that the figures of authority that I've listed, the politicians, the scholars, the journalists, etc., what they say, most of the time, it's completely irrelevant, insipid, most of the time, not always, but insipid, irrelevant, off the point, deceptive, manipulative, whatever. So there is a growing loss of trust in public discourse. This situation has occurred in different settings historically, with the printing press in the 15th century in Europe, which brought about, not directly but indirectly, it has had a strong influence on the Protestant Reformation and the Age of Enlightenment, with the circulation of ideas with the printing press, but also the communication of scientists and intellectuals, one might say, between one another, the development of an educated bourgeois elite. It has brought about the American and then the French Revolution, and then the changes which occurred in the rest of Europe in the 19th century. And it happens again differently, but the circulation of information, the fact that the keepers of the institutions are losing their legitimacy because alternative scientific political views are being made widely accessible, which are more relevant, which explain the world better, which are more appealing, which are more consistent, etc., more attractive. It will bring about, it has already been the case with Brexit and Trump, etc., but it will continue for I don't know how long, but a shift in public opinion. Yeah, democracies, they owe their legitimacy to the fact that they are supposed to take into account public opinion. They don't most of the time, but they are supposed to, and we are witnessing with the change of the circulation of information, the change of the generations, the change in demographics, the change in economic conditions. Many factors make it so that there is a shift. It happens predominantly in the Western world, Western Europe, Northern America, plus Australia, etc. I simplify. This shift of ideas is the movement of spirit, and it has brought about, it brings about, and it will bring about political changes. Yeah, and I wrote, spirit is a movement of thought, and all these changes that most people are not aware of, or if they are aware, they do not realize, they are not aware of the scope, the intensity, the importance of what is happening, what has been happening since the advent of the internet and the mass, the widespread, the mass scale availability of the internet. It's 15 years old, let us say. It has been the case for 15 years old, maybe more, but yeah. Even those who are aware that there are a lot of changes occurring, they are not aware of the scope, the extent, the importance, the intensity of these changes. So that's why people need stability, psychological, material, and one might say political stability. Means a sense of having control over their lives. People need to have I mean, some of them at least, they need to have a sense of, at least to not be completely swept off by changes that they have no influence over. They need stability. Yeah, they need to have a sense of being in control of their own life on an individual, or at least on a local level. Some people they don't care, but people who are vaguely, I wouldn't say intelligent, because it's not a matter of intelligence necessarily, but people who are vaguely interested in public life, one might say, they need stability. And that's what I am trying to provide, because I need stability myself. I have done this for my own psychological and material stability, but now I already have shared this with others in the videos that I produced about home economics. But here, that's in a way not an update. It's partly an update. Yeah, that's why I will talk about civic virtue. It's a means to find stability on a local level in troubled, rapidly moving times. Yeah. I wrote also, I'm not really interested in politics. I'm interested in the abolition of politics. I wrote there are no easy answers to any problem. That's why I'm not a populist, because I'm not on the side of the elites, the current elites, but I'm not a populist either, because the idea that the people is pure and good and it is being oppressed by the elites who are corrupt, it's way too simplistic. Of course, the people who are less educated, less intelligent, less well-endowed in terms of prestige, networking, status, etc., of course, they are less responsible for the negative consequences of various kinds, either economic problems, problems of crime, problems of corruption, problems of all sorts. They are less responsible, of course, but my view is that in a way everyone within society is partly responsible of the problems, with different degrees of responsibility, obviously depending on the level of intelligence, education, status, etc. But everyone is partly responsible. That's why there are no easy solutions. That's why I don't trust. I'm not an authoritarian in the sense that I don't believe that a strong man will emerge and solve all the problems by imposing measures. I don't believe in this, because in order to solve social problems, political problems, which are by their very nature, they concern the whole of society, it requires efforts and involvement and dedication on the part of, if not everyone, at least a significant proportion of the population. That's why, in my view, most people, here I speak about the Western world, but eventually in the whole world, but here I think about the Western world, because that's where the society, the civil society has decayed and declined the most for various reasons. But finding solutions to political problems, social, economic, ecological problems, it requires an effort on the part of everyone, or at least most people. Not the same kind of effort, because not everyone is endowed with the same qualities at all, but it requires effort from everyone. I don't believe in magical solutions. Let's vote for this guy, he will solve all the problems. No, people who think that politicians can solve problems, it's already part of the problem. Here I will quote a guy, Peter Schiff, he's an American, he ran in politics. He said whenever he was a candidate to whatever, I don't know the story, but in an interview with Jordan Peterson, he said, when I ran for, maybe he was congressman, I just said, I don't promise anything except less government, less intervention. Yeah, a good politician is a politician who should say to the people, all I'm offering is less restrictions, less taxes, less regulations, so that you, the people, will find yourself in an institutional setting which promotes liberty, which will enable you and also force you in a way to solve your own problems individually and collectively on a local level. That's good federalism. Here it means decentralization and solving problems on a local level. And since the local, what is local, in a way it's universal, because every village, every city, every town, every neighborhood, every country on this planet is its own local level, in a way. Every limited geographical area is local. So the local is everywhere. That's why the local is universal. Yeah. So yeah, that's my view. So there's no magic there's no magic recipe to solving all problems except will and intelligence. And I've made videos about home economics. They are long, sometimes they are boring maybe, but they provide an enormous amount of references, links, authors, books, the knowledge. I have shared the knowledge. That would be the intelligence. Now it requires a little bit of will. Yeah, and I have been working on this, and I continue to work on this. I will talk about this. That's morality or ethics, virtue, civic virtue. But solving problems require individual efforts on the part of, if not everyone, at least responsible, intelligent, willing people. Yeah. Also, I wrote about the interconnectedness of all the layers of being. Since there's only one universe, all the various layers that humans differentiate to help think more clearly about the world, physics, chemistry, the earth sciences, biology, sociobiology, anthropology, psychology, economics, sociology, politics, law, geopolitics, technology, art, religion, philosophy, they are all interconnected in a way. So what I've been doing on a singular level, and what I encourage people to do, is to study all the layers, because shedding light on one aspect enables to understand other aspects more clearly. The ecologists, I illustrate, they want to implement policies which are in tune with ecology, which is supposed to be a neutral, natural science. So it consists in considering and taking into account the natural, biological, in the broader sense, environment of humans in the designing of policies. That's an illustration of the unity of physics, chemistry as well, but mostly animal and vegetal biology, and the economy. That's an illustration. Another illustration, someone like Ron Paul is a very intelligent analyst of financial and political events in the US, but in the world at large, because he understands that economics, finance, politics, and morality are interconnected. Yeah. Also, I wrote about the war in Ukraine. When you think about the world as a global village, which is the case, any conflict is a conflict within the global village, within a single entity in a way. And things are interconnected through the laws of physics, chemistry, etc., but also through economics. When there is a crisis at some specific place, especially if it's interconnected heavily with the rest of the economic exchanges in terms of supply of goods or financial circulation, etc., it has an impact on the rest of the village. That's why every conflict, every war, every crisis, every problem is of concern, or should be, to everyone. You cannot live isolated. You cannot live isolated in an interconnected world. That's why the problems of any regional area are the problems of everyone. And I wrote, here I speak because I have access to the news in the French language. In France, in modern day France, there are acts of violence every day. Attacks of various sorts, theft, assault, daily almost. Yeah. So, and I know it's the case in the US, probably in England, in Germany as well, but recently in France, I don't know if it has intensified, but it has become the norm. One might say there are acts of brutality daily. I wrote the world, for all the aforementioned reasons, unity of the laws of physics, chemistry, biology, etc., and the coming into being of a world consciousness, the world will be unified eventually. My purpose, what I consciously try to do, is to participate in the process to make it happen with the least amount of damages. But eventually, the world has to be unified, because there's only one world, and here I will talk briefly about geopolitics. A balance of powers here, let us think in the really long term, many centuries, many millennia. In order for the world not to be unified at some moment, there would have to be a balance of powers, multipolarity as they call this, which would be so stable that there wouldn't be any shift in dominance, which in a world where technological innovation, demographic changes, the circulation of information, military weapons evolve at such a rapid pace, economic development, etc., to have stability, it's logically impossible. With the migrations, so the world has to be unified, but it has to be unified in the most peaceful way possible. Yeah. Also, I wrote about the Zeitgeist. I took an example. The people born in the Western world, I wrote between 1923 and 1973, which means actually people who are older than 50 years old. It can be even before 1923, but symbolically because it's 100 years old. People who are in this year 2023, people who are 50 years old or older, born in the West, they have probably experienced the most dramatic changes in the course of their lifetime that any people ever anywhere has experienced, in terms of changes in technology, demographics, culture, politics, not depending on the time scale, but in terms of the circulation of information, economics, culture, demographics, the Westerners who are older than 50 years old, the world in which they were born, symbolically, let us say people who are born before 1973, the world as it is today, as I'm recording this in 2023, so 50 years later or more for those who are born even earlier, the world is completely different to an extent probably not known to any other people anywhere ever. And one of the consequences is that there is a difficulty in communicating with older people from the West, and they could say there's difficulty in communicating with younger people precisely because the mindset, which is a product of the Zeitgeist in which they were born, and the mindset as it is now is so different that it's very difficult to communicate. The ideals that they grew up with, spread by television, a monopolistic press and mainstream media, and the ideas that the younger generations in the West are growing up with because they have access to the internet, because they are experiencing the result of dramatic demographic changes, one might say, cultural changes, economic changes. So the younger generations in the West, they really live in a world that it's the same world for all, but there is a cognitive gap between, not all of them, but between the older generations, especially in the West, and the younger generations. It's true in most civilizational areas because the informational, economic, cultural, no, but informational and economic changes have affected most countries on this planet. But in the West, there has been a change of culture and demographics, which has never been seen anywhere else in such a short amount of time. So yeah, it's part of the Zeitgeist to understand this, that and it also partly explains the gap between the discourse, the public discourse of politicians in the West and the younger generations, because the world in which they live and the world in which the younger generations in the West live, it's the same world, but it's so differently apprehended because of the generational gap that it brings about not misunderstandings but problems of communication, one might say. Yeah. Also, I wrote the dollar, the US dollar, has lost apparently 95% of its value between 1913 and 2008, I believe. Yeah. Since the Fed was established in 1913, the goods and services you could buy for $1 in 1913 now cost nearly $21. So the purchasing power of the dollar has fallen to less than 5 cents, $0.05 of its 1913 value because of inflationary policies. Yeah, so another thing that I intend to talk about briefly is that a lot of people are interested in economy, not interested in economics, but they are focused on economic problems, how to make money, basically, increase purchasing power, etc. But for personal reasons, I have had the opportunity to be detached from the daily struggle for bread, one might say. But when you take a little bit of perspective and have the time, the interest to study economics, precisely you realize that the economy is kind of rigged because the money that so many people are interested in constantly, subtly, unnoticeably, I'm not sure this is an English word, but the money constantly loses its purchasing power. So people are constantly being robbed of the fruit of their labor because the central banks can create money out of thin air, which has a consequence of devaluing the value of the money in circulation. Yeah. That's counterfeiting in a way, legalized counterfeiting. I will not talk about the Federal Reserve, central banking, etc. I've talked about this already. There are good links. Ron Paul, the Mises Institute, they talk about it, but simply it's part of the process of coming into consciousness, etc. At some moment, more and more people will become aware that the way the monetary system is structured in the West, but in a lot of countries in the world actually, makes it so that the valued asset, the valued good that people work to obtain, namely money, it is being constantly devalued because of the policies of the central banks, whether it's the Fed or the European Central Bank. Yeah, and also there is the age-old problem of socialism, socialist policies, monopolistic, centrally planned, controlled by government economic policies. The problem of incentive, namely, in a socialist economy, and more Western countries are socialist economically, there is no incentive simply because if you work, if you accumulate wealth and capital, the state takes it away from you in the name of redistribution and justice. So, and here, the situation of the Western world, younger generations, they have no incentive to work and invest and accumulate wealth and develop prosperity and eventually pass on a material legacy to their possible future children, simply because if they study a little bit of economics and politics, they notice that in the name of whatever social justice, redistribution, righting past wrongs, or climate struggle against climate change, or whatever is proclaimed in the name of some supposedly noble ideal as it is presented, the governments of the Western world will confiscate more and more property. So when you are a young Westerner and who has acquired a little bit of economic culture and political culture, you quickly come to the realization that working hard to try to become affluent, it's pointless, because the politicians, by using the resentment and the envy of the less affluent members of society, they will confiscate whatever wealth you might spend years or decades trying to accumulate. So there's no incentive when you see the patterns, the demographic changes, the political changes, the brainwashing, etc. When you see the patterns in the longer term, you understand that the game is rigged in a way. There's no point in working for more than just the bare minimum of having an income to buy food, but there's no incentive to build a sustaining, successful, prosperous career if you're not a materialist in the ordinary sense of interested in material wealth, not in the philosophical sense, but if you are not, if you do not have materialistic inclinations, you have no incentive to develop a career and to work hard and to make money, simply because you understand that excuses will be found to confiscate the money in terms of in the name of redistribution, etc., etc. And with the cultural and demographic changes occurring at a very fast pace, there are a lot of people, plus the brainwashing, there are a lot of people among the younger generations of Westerners who have no respect or consideration or even knowledge of or respect for or interest in the principles of private property, the importance of fairness in society. They have been trained to think that those who possess wealth have stolen the wealth. That's a very simplified, poor quality Marxism, so that it's just and fair and justified to steal the money from the more prosperous to redistribute it to the masses, which have been impoverished by failed economic monetary policies, but they do not say this. So when you understand, here I will not make a thorough explanation, but when you understand this, you realize that it's not worth investing in this civilization when you see the trends and this coming into consciousness of psychological mechanism triggered by economic changes. In ordinary language, when you understand that socialism has always failed and will always fail for inherent structural reason, and when you understand that there's a revival of the appeal of socialism in the name of, like I said, ecology, here's the antidote maybe. You see the trick and you do not get fooled. Yeah. And here I will make a comment about the situation, the political situation in France in 2023. Monsieur Zemmour, Eric Zemmour, who was a candidate to the French election in 2022, who is a right-wing Jew, one might say, has been attacked, one might say, while giving conferences by groups of predominantly white people. So we are living an age where young, privileged, white, bourgeois leftists are attacking Jews in the name of anti-fascism. For people who have a vague historical culture, it's kind of ironic that a Jewish intellectual and Jewish politician is being attacked and cannot move around in peace and security in a country like France, because he's attacked by overwhelmingly Antifa groups composed of bourgeois young white people. So that's kind of a reversal. It's ironic, it's not very funny, but it's ironic that because precisely the Antifa, these are young privileged white bourgeois group who use violence to silence opponents with the implicit support of authority, and this phenomenon, historically it had a name in the Italy of the 1920s. It was called fascism. Yeah. So yeah. Jewish intellectuals are being persecuted not because they are Jewish, but because they are right-wing. But they are being persecuted by a group of violent, hostile white people. But in 2023, these young white people, they call themselves an Antifa and radical leftists. They don't see that they are being used in a way. Yeah, so it's kind of a bitter irony. Yeah. And it has happened. Here we are, the 22nd of June. It happened over the past few days or week, I don't know exactly. But if it had been the aggression of a Jewish lecturer, when I say a Jewish intellectual, by right-wing groups, it would have made the headline, and it would have been considered unacceptable. But it was perpetrated by Antifa group, radical left-wing groups. So yeah. Yeah. Okay, so now I will talk about individual virtue. I'll just read notes that I wrote this afternoon, briefly. To act ethically means, in my view, to act consistently. It has to be a process of actualizing virtuous behavior by following consistently a set of rules, and those rules, in order to be truly ethical, they have to be valid for all. They have to be universal. That's very simplified, a Kantian view, but actually it's correct, one might say. Yeah. And I wrote also freedom. Here that's a very simplified philosophical view, but it's kind of relevant. Freedom is not given, it has to be conquered. Freedom for the individual is a conquest. It's like truth. It's the purpose and aim. It is what is aimed at, to liberate oneself, to become free. One is not born free, one can only liberate oneself. That's from me. It has to be built. Freedom has to be built. It's not given. When you are born, even if you are born in a free country, you are not born free as an individual. There are various degrees as a citizen. Of course, there are countries where it's better to be born where the conditions to live in a free society are more favorable in some countries or some civilization or some eras or some areas, of course. But nonetheless, liberty has to be built. I wrote, there is no freedom, there is only liberation. Liberation, implicitly, it means that you have to liberate yourself from constraints that you have to overcome, transcend, etc. Freedom requires discipline, work, effort, and this is what is called virtue. it requires to master your body, your mind, to discipline your behavior, to domesticate your instincts. And here it's really a very simple philosophical view, but people who have no philosophical culture, usually they think that to be free means to do whatever you like. But precisely the philosophical definition of freedom is almost the opposite. Freedom consists in doing not what you don't like, but in restraining yourself, in sacrificing aspects of yourself, in polishing, improving yourself, in practicing discipline, in making an effort, in struggling. Freedom, liberation is the result. It has to be aimed at, but eventually it's the result of a struggle. It requires that you should renounce primitive instincts or tendencies, or if they cannot be suppressed, they have to be refined. Yeah. So it requires effort, refinement, discipline, etc., etc. Yeah. So yeah, it's common sense, but it's not very commonly known. But actually, first, in the modern world, there are not a lot of people who are interested in liberty. But even those who are, usually what they call liberty is just blind obedience to primitive instincts, greed in economics, lust in men and women relationships, all sorts of behavior. It's really a loosened, decadent view of freedom, whereas historically, philosophically, either freedom for the individual or for the collective, and usually they go hand in hand, it requires really virtue. There can be no freedom without virtue, which means individual effort, constant, consistent. So here I wrote, this is what I intend to talk about, but the introduction of the video has been very long. I simplify, here I give good pieces of advice. I've already done this in my videos about home economics, but I repeat more simply. Do not let poison enter your body nor your mind. So I give pieces of advice. Give up cigarettes, drugs of all sorts, alcohol, junk food, fast food, soft drinks. Reduce processed food to the greatest extent possible. Avoid excesses in terms of coffee, etc. So the first step towards behaving, I wouldn't say virtuously, but to be healthy, is not to let poison enter your body nor your mind. I will not make the thorough list, but there are a lot of things which have to be rejected, in a way, for the sake of psychological, physiological, personal health. Then, the renunciation of vices and addictions of all sorts. It can include the aforementioned tobacco, alcohol, food, drinks, etc., etc., but also pornography, masturbation, gambling, television, the negative influence of social media, etc., etc. I've already made the list, it can be even increased, but yeah. To try to be as indifferent as possible in regards to sensuous pleasures. So precisely, to reject hedonism. Hedonism is the philosophical doctrine which says that the greatest good consists in sensuous pleasures, precisely. virtue is kind of opposed, and in a way liberty is kind of opposed to hedonism, precisely because hedonism is the spontaneous tendency to do what is enjoyable, pleasing, immediately for the senses, food, drink, sex, etc., comfort. But here I express a personal opinion, but actually it can be partly universally validated. In order to liberate oneself, especially men have to be kind of indifferent to the sensuous pleasures. Not reject them fanatically like some religious groups might be tempted to do sometimes, but not to be a slave to the sensuous temptations, one might say, to be kind of indifferent, to aim higher, to aim at higher values, higher virtues, higher goals than simply the pleasures of the flesh, as they call this. Yeah. Also, I wrote, eating well and exercising, it's important to eat locally bought, locally grown, fresh, organic food as often as possible. It's good for the self and for the local community, one might say. Yeah. I've already talked about this, but here I just repeat simply. To reject procrastination, the daily tasks which are a little bit boring, to do them as early as possible in order not to let too much tasks, too much work accumulate, to solve, I wouldn't say problems, but to do things which are easy to do as regularly, as early as possible in order to avoid accumulation of problems, to have a good work ethic, to work as consistently and as intensely as possible, not excessively. And here it's precisely liberation in a way, and discipline is a process of growth, because here my personal experience, for many years I was not a very disciplined, very hard working person, one might say. It was not because of laziness, partly a little bit, but also because of psychological problems, one might say. But I have developed over the past, when I say the past few years, but especially since I started restarted this YouTube channel, I've had a very consistent work ethic. I am dedicated fully to what I do, gathering knowledge, practicing civic virtue. I've been doing this for almost 9 months now. Improving myself intellectually, psychologically, physically. It's not my primary intention, but I've been working on this as well. Sharing knowledge, classifying, systematizing, communicating in a more clear way, to become more responsible, more mature, more efficient, more to become better. Yeah. Also, wasting time on daily tasks by refusing the seduction of technology, sometimes it can be very good. For example, washing the laundry manually, not having a dishwasher, cooking your own food, taking the time to cook your own food instead of buying and cooking processed food. In a way, it's a waste of time, because you willingly spend more time on tasks which could be done more rapidly with technology, but it enables you to gain independence, maturity, and balance, and to appreciate more and to be less dependent on technology with all the expenses that come with it. So practicing minimalism is a means to grow and to become more independent, one might say. Yeah. I wrote Clean Your Room. I've been working very hard on this for many months. Organizing, structuring, ordering, cleaning, simplifying your immediate environment. It's like an investment. It's really important. Mr. Peterson is very wise in this sense, because once you live in a ordered, structured environment which has been simplified, you know where everything is, you are much more productive because you waste a whole lot less time searching for things. You know exactly where things are. You are more calm and more stable and more peaceful because you can access important documents, you can circulate more easily, you do not bother buying useless stuff, you own only things which are useful. So it's like an investment. It takes many, depending on other factors, but it can take many weeks to many months to really order your room, and then it requires a day-to-day investment by cleaning, reordering, reshaping. That's the struggle of order against the tendency towards entropy and disorganization. It requires a daily investment, but it's really worthwhile. And yeah, I wrote virtue. Here it's in a simple way, but it's kind of true nonetheless. Virtue is a constant effort, like marriage. And I wrote either personal or civic virtue. Little acts of virtue, either personal or civic, are like little acts of kindness in a marriage. It can help a great deal. Imagine being married to a great wife. Of course, there are really great moments with your wife, yeah. But marriage is not just the good aspects, or it's not just the very good aspects. These are also the ordinary. I've never been married empirically, but I can imagine the ordinary business, in the sense of the day-to-day interactions in a married couple. And in order for the marriage to be long-lasting and as enjoyable as possible for both partners, it requires little acts, little efforts, if not every day, but rather consistently. Sometimes, if both spouses, the wife and the husband, if both make efforts, small efforts every day, little efforts but consistently, it can do miracles, it can do wonders. This is the I simplify, but the secret of success for long-lasting relationship in marriages. It requires involvements and dedication on the parts of both. And the more you are willing to make efforts, the more your partner, your wife, will be willing to make efforts as well, to find compromises, to make the good moments more frequent and the bad moments less frequent, or at least to find more to solve the problems more peacefully, or more I don't know how to say this, but seriously, it's serious. Virtue is like marriage. It requires daily, constant, consistent efforts. And if you, here, let us take the metaphor of the marriage. If you live with your girlfriend that you intend to marry, or with your wife, making efforts, if it's not, of course there are the daily efforts to keep the household running, yeah, to bring in the income, educate the children, keep the house clean, etc., yeah, but also efforts for the preservation and the enhancement of the marriage, not only in terms of the economic unit, but in terms of the romantic relationship. If you have a romantic relationship with your wife, which I hope you do, It requires to work on your marriage on the romantic aspect. It means to keep the passion which brought you into the marriage in the first place, to keep the fire burning, one might say, not too much, or maybe yes, I don't know, but to keep the flame of love thriving. It requires involvement on the parts of both spouses, not necessarily daily, but to make efforts, little acts of kindness or attention. You work on yourself to be good for your partner, either physically or morally, or to improve yourself. Consistency is important. It's good if there are moments of intense passion. It's good, of course, but the more serious aspect, intense passion can be very serious, but the more the more reasonable, there has to be very high, very intense moments of passion, but the more reasonable path to enable those wonderful moments of shared romance, what I say, in order to keep them going, there has to be a more boring aspect of the management of the marriage, one might say, and it requires efforts. Here I'm serious. It requires efforts on a consistent basis on the parts of both. The men, in a way, they have to make more efforts because they are the leading. They are the leaders. Yeah, so it's on their shoulders, the responsibility. But you have to show that you are willing to make efforts for the other. And virtue, that's how it works as well. To live in a marriage or in society, it requires constant effort. And the more consistent you are, and the more people do this, either in a marriage, we're only talking about two partners. Most of the time, there are only two partners in marriages in modern societies. The wife would say, thank God there are only two of us. The husband would say, sometimes I wish there were more. or less. That's a joke. Two is a good number when it comes to marriages between a wife and a husband. Let's settle on two. If it goes to 3, don't tell the wife. Oh, that's a joke. No, but seriously. Virtue, in a way, it's a constant struggle, but here struggle does not necessarily mean negative. It means it requires effort, constant investment in terms of willingness, dedication. It has to be constant, consistent. There has to be a daily dose of virtue, either in marriage or in civic life. I'm not married, but I've been practicing this on a civic level for more than 8 months now, and on a personal level for more than a year. Also, I wrote, reality is the way it is. Your limitations are the way they are, whether intellectual, physical limitations. Every human being, as a human, is limited. He has limitations, inherent features which are finite in a way. So reality, the whole of reality is the way it is. Your limitations are the way they are. Your past, whoever you are, whenever you watch this, whatever you have done in your life, you did what you did. The past is the way it has been. So the first step towards liberation is to acknowledge this, that things are the way they are. The first step towards liberation is to acknowledge that things are the way they are. Reality is not always pleasant. Humans have limitations. Some have more talent, more abilities, more desirable, attractive features, either intellectual, in terms of temper, personality, talent, character, or beauty, or physical features. Some are more well endowed than others, obviously, but everyone has its own limitations. And as long as you live, my view is that you ought to seek to improve yourself. The things you did what you did. If you have made errors, you made the errors that you made. All the successes that you have achieved, you've achieved them. But as long as you can think and act, try to improve yourself. Even if you are already very good, you can still improve. And if you have made dubious decisions, or if your life has been very difficult, as long as you think and act, you can improve. And the first step towards improving yourself is to acknowledge that things are the way they are. Yeah. Once you've acknowledged this, you can seek to improve. So there's no... that's in a way a very simplified Stoic view. There's no need in self-pitying or complaining about, oh, things could have... No, what happened, happened. As long as you can act and think, try not to dwell too much on the negative aspect of the past. You can remember the good parts if it enables you to find hope, joy, inspiration, resilience, strength, whatever, the good aspects. If thinking about the bad aspects can help you improve yourself, that's good, but do not dwell too much. Do not spend too much time meddling with the past. What happened, happened. Once you've understood this, focus on the present and how your actions will shape the future for the better. Yeah. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to have made mistakes. But once you realize this, try to improve yourself. Yeah, that's what I could say. Also, I wrote reading good books as often as possible and as well as possible is a good piece of advice. And taking notes while reading, underlying the important words. I've really started to do this over the past few months. When I read books now, I will use this as an example. I underline a lot of points, and then so I make a first reading of the book where I read more or less fast while underlining the important words, and then I reread later. And what I've been doing here, I make a brief remark. What I've been doing over the past few weeks, what I say, is to write on a computer file the important words of the books that I've been reading in order to build some sort of a list of important terminology from all the fields of the sciences to help find the categories, which will help me improve my documents and also improve my understanding of the world and understanding of reality and my ability to interconnect the various fields of knowledge, to use the concepts of one field, like evolutionary psychology in the realm of economics, for instance, to make connections, bridges between the various fields, which are the theoretical inquiry about the various layers of being, one might say. So yeah, reading good books as often as possible, as well as possible, and taking notes thinking about what you read, taking notes, remembering, commenting if you are an intellectual person. That's important. I wrote also on a more pragmatic level, storing value, finding alternatives to storing value in the bank. It can be very helpful. Food supplies, tools, equipment, precious metals, land, alternative currencies, various means of storing, or skills, investing in skills, storing value in other forms than money in the bank. Yeah. And also about relationships. I do not intend to talk about gender dynamics in this video, but I wrote reading this book can help a lot. It's really an excellent book that I highly recommend. And I made another remark about the various addiction and vices. This book explains that basically our brain is the product, in the official chronology, our brain in a way has evolved to be adapted to a specific environment, the savannah of Africa many tens of thousands of years ago, and the modern environment of the modern world. Here it means the past few thousands of years, but especially the past couple of centuries, and even more. So first there is the Neolithic revolution with the advent of agriculture, then the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century with industrial production, and the technological revolution over the past few decades, one might say. Our brains are not adapted to living in the modern environment, and here examples are: humans are wired to evolve and interact in groups of people. I think the number is approximately 150, because in the historical perspective, the evolutionary perspective, humans have evolved in relatively tiny groups of not more than 150 persons broadly. So the human brain is not adapted to interact on a regular basis with more than a certain amount of people. And in terms of the various addictions, in the past environments, that's what this book explains, finding sources of fat or sugar, for instance, enabled those who found those sources of fat or sugar to gain energy and to gain a reproductive advantage. It made them able to access more resources or more mates, or have more success in the competition for mates in a way. So that's the hypothesis, but they tended to pass on their genes and to have more offsprings. They tended to be more successful in competition for resources, survival, and mating. So they tended to have a higher number of offsprings, and therefore a greater likelihood of passing on the genes which selected for whatever mutant behavior that they had, and therefore the propensity or the tendency to enjoy sugar, fat, etc. has evolved within humans, because those who had a greater number of offspring, and therefore they were more successful in the evolutionary struggle. And that's why modern humans, who are descendants in this perspective of these people who gain greater reproductive success because they were more willing or more able to acquire resources like fat, sugar, etc. because they were more daring. They tried eating fruits or honey or whatever. We have inherited a taste for food, fat, food, sweet, sugar, or even alcohol. Because alcohol, in an evolutionary perspective, the taste, the interest that people have for alcohol is derived, that's the evolutionary hypothesis, from ripe fruits, because they contain alcohol. So yeah, but I will not go into the full story, but basically what offered a competitive advantage in a very different environment many tens of thousands of years ago, namely the taste for fat and sugar, in the modern environment of industrial, developed consumer society, it has become very detrimental, because most of them are no longer capable of controlling their impulses, and enjoying sugar in the African savanna of many tens of thousands of years ago, it may give a competitive advantage, but in the modern Western developed world, it's a hindrance, because sugar is widely available, and it has become very detrimental to the health, the physiological health of people, which brings about obesity, diabetes, problems of heart, circulation, blood pressure, etc. And then eventually, for the people who are overweight because of bad food habits, they tend to lose self-confidence in interactions. It affects them psychologically. So yeah, our brains are not fully adapted to have the most optimal responses to the stimuli of the modern environment of highly populated, highly prosperous modern societies. Yeah, that's just an illustration. About civic virtue. So here I've been talking about individual virtue, what individuals can do on a singular level, what I have been practicing for many months now. And now I will talk about the more civic aspect, the more political in the classical sense. Polis means the city in a way. What I have been doing, and what I encourage whoever you are, what I encourage you to do, if you have the means, the interest, the capability, first buying food supplies, but also offering food supplies. What I've been doing is offer anonymously supplies of food with books which encourage people to eat organic diet, or to make supplies, or sometimes good books about economics, because this is connected with what I said much earlier in the video about the troubled times that we live in. It's in the best interest of everyone, wherever he or she finds himself, that the greater number of people around the place where he finds himself be as responsible, as independent and autonomous as possible, and as stable as possible. And I wrote offering supplies and books. If you are not poor or not too poor, it's not very costly in terms of money or time or effort. I don't know, if you do this once a week, you offer $15 of food plus a book which costs between $10 and $15. So for $30, if you have the financial means, it's not very costly on an individual level. It can be rewarding because you have the feeling of doing something good for the community, and it can have it can bring great benefits to the person who will receive the gift, so I might say, if it encourages this person to change his or her behavior in terms of diet or in terms of household management for the better. So if you do this, you can help anonymously or directly. You can help another person who is really in difficulty economically, and who maybe is in need of guidance. So you can offer books about prepping, about organic diet, about local eating local, encouraging local businesses, whatever books. I have made a sufficient list, I think, in my videos on home economics. So it's not very costly for you if you have the means to do this, but it can help a lot others, and it's really a good idea. I've been applying this for probably 8 months on a very consistent basis, several times a week. Yeah. Also, about civic virtue, I've been cleaning the streets a few minutes or a few dozens of minutes each day with a very high rate of consistency, more than 95%, I would say, since the month of October 2022. I've been participating in local charities. Wherever you are, there are charities around in your local area. So I cannot act in your local charity if you live at the other half of the planet, the other end of the planet, but you can do it. I've been communicating, I've been making efforts to communicate with my biological family. I've been buying local products overwhelmingly. I've been cleaning my room, I've been working and studying very hard, very intensely, and I will continue to do so. I've been ignoring politics. I don't believe in politics, I don't believe in modern mass democracy, I don't believe in the political game, so I do not waste my time. Sometimes I listen to what politicians say to have bits of information about the Zeitgeist, because it's part of the Zeitgeist, but I do not waste my time with politics because I don't believe in politics. Yeah. I've been giving work to do to beggars. I started this many months ago, this experiment. It hasn't worked very well because a lot of them are not interested or are not motivated, but here I would say 50% of the time when I encounter a beggar, one time out of two, I give him a little work to do. It can be clean the street, bring trash to the trash can for the glass, or things like this. It's something useful that I cannot do, or I could do, but it would cost me a lot because here, that's personal reason. Sometimes I have more important things to do, or because just to encourage people who are really in dire economic conditions, who are beggars or homeless, to encourage them to re-socialize, or to give them a hand, not a handout, by encouraging them to participate in a useful endeavor for the community. No, you can give them money if they take if they are willing to work, even if it's just 15 minutes or 30 minutes or 45 minutes. Yeah, most of the time, not most of the time, but at least half the time when I've encountered a beggar over the past many months, I have given him work to do. When they are willing and when they seem to be trustworthy, I have repeated this. That's one way of, it's not enough, of course, but it's a step towards solving global problems of poverty, desocialization, etc. on a local level. And if more people did this, instead of doing money to beggars, I don't believe in this. Sometimes, out of charity, yes, but I don't believe that people should give money to beggars, but they should give them the opportunity to re-socialize. That's what I believe in, that's what I've been practicing consistently. Yeah, it's not enough, of course, the problems are more structural, but yeah. I don't believe in the welfare state. I don't believe that it's efficient. I don't believe that it's morally justified. I don't believe that it's financially sustainable. So but I'm aware that the problems of poverty and social cohesion, they have to be solved eventually, but I don't believe that the state is entitled or has the legitimacy or I don't believe that the state should be trusted to solve the problems of poverty. It only makes things worse. It makes people more dependent, etc. But I believe in social cooperation, and it's the responsibility of responsible citizens to solve this problem on a local level, on a personal basis, by identifying the people who are willing to make an effort to re-socialize. Most of the beggars, they have had very difficult life experiences. Maybe they lost a job, they fell into drugs, they had a divorce, they had an accident, whatever, but offering them the opportunity to reintegrate society through work, to make them feel useful and to make them perform useful tasks, not through the mediation of the state, but by willing cooperation. It's not very efficient, but because it requires more organized way, but I've been doing this. And if you do this, whoever you are, if you act, these are examples: cleaning the streets, participating in local charities, helping the churches by giving food or giving books, buying local, encouraging local entrepreneurs, small businesses. If you do this, you will gain a social reputation for being responsible and concerned with the well-being of the local community, and it will facilitate a peaceful transition in troubled times. So I can only encourage. I've been practicing this myself for months and months. I've been distributing hundreds of books over the month, and I continue to do so. Every week I distribute books, I distribute t-shirts like these, not this one, but sometimes I distribute t-shirts. I distribute supplies anonymously to encourage people to help really the people who are in dire financial situation, but also to encourage them to be more responsible and to change their behavior. That's how problems can be solved. It requires efforts on the part of everyone. Also, I've been promoting and helping, like I said, small entrepreneurs. That's what I believe in, with no distinction of origin. I've encouraged entrepreneurs because these are people who usually they are more interested in private property and liberty because they have a stake in their business. The money that they make, they owe it to their own efforts. Of course, there is the infrastructures provided by society, but these are people who have a personal stake in the success of their endeavor. And also about Aristotelian virtue. Aristotle said that it is by practicing that one masters and improves one's own skill. Virtue and skills requires practice. It's a state of perfectioning. You have to practice to improve, to get better, and the more you do, the more you improve, the more you get better in a way. And also in logical categories, quantity, if it is slightly increased or decreased, but here it's increased, small quantitative increases, which at first appear insignificant, there comes a moment where an indifferent quantitative change turns into a qualitative change. That's a change of measure. When quantity turns into quality, that's a change of measure. And that's like the marriage that I mentioned earlier, if you do little acts, even if it's just 5 minutes each day, picking up the cigarette butts, the cans, and the trash in the street, if you do this little acts, if you buy supplies for the local charity or the local church, or if you buy if you offer supplies at the local grocery store, if you offer books, whatever, if you do this consistently, these are very small acts of virtue which are not very costly either in terms of time, money, effort. But if you do this consistently, you will end up behaving virtuously. And if more and more people do this, this is what enables a society to be healthy and to be not to be dependent on the state and to reinstate, to re-establish civil interaction, civic interaction. Because here it's connected with what I said earlier, reality is the way it is. In a society, there are a lot of people that spontaneously you do not especially want to live with. You are indifferent to a lot of people, or sometimes even you are not interested. Sometimes you are not interested in interacting with a lot of people. Sometimes you are not even tempted. You are even tempted not to interact with some people, either because of differences in ethnicity, class, age, religion, political affiliations. But a society is composed of very diverse people on many aspects, and living with people who are different ethnically, economically, politically, religiously, psychologically, in terms of age, in terms of job, people who are really different and with whom you do not share spontaneously many things in common except the fact that you live within the same ecology, in the sense of environment. Growing up, in a way, it means, from a civic standpoint, it means to contribute to the life of the community, whether or not you have a personal bond, a personal affection for the members of the community. You have to do your duty, in a way, in terms of civic participation, even if you don't personally appreciate all the members because of various diverging points. But precisely to grow up and to become responsible means to act for the good of the community, whether or not you appreciate personally all the members of the community. Okay. Now I will talk about libertarianism. Precisely, I wrote, there are conflicting interests within society. I wrote, that's why, here I speak, this is the case in most societies, everywhere, but especially in the 21st century in Western societies. That's why I bet on libertarianism, first because this is why what I genuinely believe in, but also because the movement of spirit and the movement of the conditions of modern Western societies, I think this book talks about this at some moment. When humans, most of them, they are territorial, in a sense that, especially the males, they need to have a sense of identification with a given territories, with boundaries that they can call their own. It works in the animal world, among many species of mammals, primates, etc., but it works for human as well. There is attachment, emotional, when I say, to a specific location, and men need to assert their dominance over a given territory. It can be more or less intense, more or less expressed more or less peacefully and reasonably, but a sense of belonging with a land and with a people, that which we call ethnocentrism, is natural. Here natural means neutral, means that's how things are. A lot of humans, they are programmed to be ethnocentric, to favor for genetic interests, their own kind, people who look like them physically, because it means unconsciously for a lot of people that they share the same genes. And here, from a strictly Darwinian perspective, what humans unconsciously are interested in is passing on their genes and favoring the success of their own genes, either on an individual level, that's the view of Dawkins, or their genetic kinship, that's a more group theory of evolution. Yeah. So, because of the circumstances in the 21st century, with the changes of demographics occurring, ethnocentrism, the rise and the revival of ethnocentrism among Europeans, here it means white people, in Western Europe and Northern America, Australia, New Zealand, etc., is a natural reaction against the changes brought by demographic changes and immigration. That's how things happen. The revival of ethnocentrism, in a way, it is already happening. It is being manifested politically, either more or less consciously, but it in a way it intensifies with the younger generation, partly. This is how things are. It's not necessarily good, because it can bring about negative reactions, but this is what I said earlier, reality is the way it is. Understanding how it is the first step. Yeah. So there are, and there will be ethnocentric reaction it can be negative but positive in a way as well, because it can mean more care, more interest, more concern, more willingness to help people of the same genetic kin. This is the rise of populism, when I say, or the return of the right in a lot of Western countries. This is a tendency. This is how things are. Of course, people with historical culture and concern for the welfare of society at large, when I say, they know very well that it can bring about negative consequences which are not desirable. Also, with the search for freedom against the excesses of the anarcho-tyrannical state, the warfare state, which dominates most Western countries, especially US, but other Western countries, people will revolt in a way and search for freedom, more freedom from the centralized government. So these two tendencies, a revival of ethnocentrism among Europeans, plus a search for more freedom, the consequence is that people will be attracted towards libertarianism for the freedom, the decentralization, the deregulation, the simplification that it promotes, but also, so that's the good aspect, and also libertarianism, the modern libertarian, is a means, I've already said this, it's a means for white people to assert themselves, and all peoples need to assert themselves, and politics is a means of self-assertion. Libertarianism is a means for whites to assert themselves without hurting others, or without hurting them too much, or to assert themselves while promoting a set of a political ideology which is compatible with potentially all peoples and all people of goodwill. Libertarianism is universal because it promotes peaceful cooperation based on voluntary agreement, and it can be potentially shared by people of all origins, all religious affiliations, all economic backgrounds, etc. So, of course, empirically, it appeals predominantly to highly intelligent white people, predominantly. But here it's kind of serious. Libertarianism is a means for white people to channel, to domesticate, to master, to discipline their will to power, like all peoples have of all origins. They have will to power, which can be for the good when it is used to bring about productive endeavors, of course, but it can be negative if it's used in a destructive fashion or in a search for oppression and domination. Dominance is good, domination not so. So whites, especially the younger generations, among the younger generation, they need to assert themselves and they are searching for dominance. But of course, domination is not good. The domination over others, it's not the purpose and it's not desirable. So libertarianism, for the two aforementioned reasons, is the way of the future because it enables white people who are in need to assert themselves politically to do so in a way which is universal and which can appeal to all people of goodwill, independently of origin. Mr. Ron Paul has made an interview of Vivek Ramaswamy, an Indian American, an American of Indian origin, Indian of India, who runs for president, apparently. That's just an illustration that the libertarian ideals can appeal, and sometimes, a lot of times, I want to say, they appeal to people of all origins, potentially. But of course, a realistic view consists in being aware that it appeals predominantly to highly intelligent people. That's the good aspect of libertarianism, but that's also the limit and the limitation in a way that when it appeals to non-whites, it appeals predominantly to the most intelligent members. It's good, but libertarianism is an ideology for really highly intelligent people, and there are a lot of white people who are not interested or who are even sometimes hostile to libertarianism, and there are a lot of non-white people who are not interested either. But yeah, it's difficult, but it's an ideology which is coherent, consistent, which promotes willful cooperation, and which can be adopted potentially by people of all backgrounds. Yeah. So that's why there are other reasons, but personally I believe in libertarianism for Northwestern Europeans, at least. But I know that it will become more and more widespread among these specific demographics because of the aforementioned reason. It's a reasonable way to solve a lot of problems, and it offers what a lot of Europeans are in need of or will be in search of, namely more freedom, less regulations, less bureaucracy, etc., etc. Yeah. So that's why I have been promoting and will continue to promote libertarian ideas, and that's why I have been working, and I will continue to do so, to try to implement a more free society, and it requires effort. This is what I've been talking about for almost 2 hours now, on an individual and collective level. It requires effort, dedication, work, struggle, etc., etc. I wrote also briefly about libertarianism. In a libertarian society, you can choose to live a minimalist lifestyle. For instance, the Amish, the US have been historically as close as you can get to a libertarian society, the most free, or one of the most free societies in the world. It's becoming less and less free, but it still is more free than most other societies. And you can choose to live in a minimalist lifestyle. The example are the Amish. You can choose to renounce comfort, hedonism, material prosperity, to live a simple life. That's a possibility in a truly free society. Of course, you have to have the means to buy the land, but then you ought to have, and actually you do have the freedom to live a simple life without too much intervention, preventing coercion from the state, etc., etc. In a socialist society, poverty is compulsory. Oppression as well. So yeah. So libertarian societies or relatively free societies offer choice. Collectivist societies don't. Yeah. I wrote about paganism and libertarianism. Groups of idealists, whether political idealists, whether these are racial or social groups, whether these are tribes based on racial lines, or people who want to gather together to build a social utopia, it can be libertarian or communist or whatever. Most of the time, historically, it has failed. To try to live isolated from the rest of the world or from the rest of society as tightly knit group of individuals, the kibbutz in Israel, this is a rare example of a successful sometimes, the Amish as well, but it's very rare. Most of the time the utopias, the concrete utopias built by leftists, ecologists, maybe it can work, but a lot of, or nationalists or whatever, most of the time it fails because people, they want liberty and this collectivist lifestyle, whether it's based on ethnic or social ideals, most of the time it fails because the requirements are too demanding in terms of subordinating the individual to the community, and most of the time it attracts people who are unbalanced psychologically. It can turn into sectarian movements. So yeah. And I wrote, the laws of economics apply to all. That's why Mises was clear-minded about this. The laws of economics, if they are true, they are widespread, they are universal. They are not widespread, they are universal. They are valid for primitive tribes, Amazonian tribes in the Amazonian forest, for idealist groups. They are valid in the stock market in the city of London. They are valid for the planners of the Chinese Communist Party, for the entrepreneurs in America. They are valid for all. Yeah. Also, I wrote, Afro-Americans in the United States of America, up until the 1960s, they tried, most of them, to copy, to imitate standards of economic success, social success, behavior, good behavior, one might say, set by white people. And here, that's kind of a libertarian view. I borrow this from Charles Murray and Stefan Molyneux, but I trust their view on this. When white people, up until the 1960s, when they had standards of behavior, of good behavior, minorities tried to imitate them, and Afro-Americans, I know this, I do not have the statistics, but I know it's partly true, a lot of Afro-Americans, they were more successful relatively in the 1950s than they are today, because white people had very high standards in terms of marriage stability, economic success, education, discipline, religiosity, etc. So a lot of white people who aspired to imitate the standards, they worked very hard to try to be on the same level in a way, acting white as they call this, but actually some of them, a lot of them even succeeded. But since whites have completely lost or abandoned their standards of behavior collectively, not all of them, but collectively over the past many decades, there is no more incentive for a lot of minority groups to try to imitate the majority in predominantly white populated country. There is no incentive to imitate the majority when a lot of people behave like members of a decadent and declining society. So here I understand. So in a way, there are, here it's common sense, but there are various modes of equality. There is an attempt to equalize oneself with high standards. It requires effort. But there's also equality can also mean to try to downgrade those who are more successful, and here it's really negative and counterproductive. And there are a lot of negative behaviors among Afro-American groups or other minority groups, sometimes Muslim communities in Western Europe. Drugs, the petty criminalities, the dropouts, broken families, etc., unemployment, because the majority, which is still predominantly white in the 21st century, at least in the early decades, has abandoned its own standards and the requirements to behave in a certain way, even or especially for whites. So if the majority does not set standards of behavior and of excellence, if they do not offer an ideal that historically less successful group could try to imitate for the better, then one should not be surprised or if people are not interested in trying to imitate standards which are not worthy of being imitated. Yeah. So here I formulate it differently. I can understand why a lot of modern Afro-Americans or Muslims in Western Europe have no interest in trying to fit into society, because society really has become decadent. It can be used as an excuse for really dubious behaviors, and it shouldn't, but I understand why a lot of young Muslims in Western Europe do not want to assimilate or to fit into society, because really the standards set by the white majority have really become decadent in terms of behavior, culture, ethics, etc. So it's not, I'm not trying to justify negative behaviors on the part of minorities, but simply I understand why members of some minorities, can be Hispanics or other minorities, they might not have even the temptation to try to imitate the standards in a good sense, because the standards have disappeared most of the time. Yeah, if those who are supposed to be the bearers of their own civilization, if they do not respect their own legacy, if they do not set ethical standards, standards of excellence for the whole of society, which means for themselves in terms of quantitative proportion of the population, then the rest of society cannot be expected to follow the non-existing standards. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to express. Also, in case it's not clear, but I have been reading this book recently, there are a lot of Jews who want to live in a peaceful white society, because let's be honest, white people, they tend historically, or at least over the past many centuries, they have had the tendency, especially over the past couple of centuries, to produce the best societies. And here it's partly just an opinion, but it can be checked empirically by the movement of migrations over the past few decades. Where do people want to live? Either white people of Europe or non-whites of the rest of the world, where do they want to live predominantly when they have the possibility to go where they think is the best, the society which offers the best opportunity? They want to live in free societies overwhelmingly populated by white people. Non-whites, they want to go to Western Europe or Northern America, and whites in Western Europe, here I know about the case of France, the very intelligent people with a diploma, highly educated, usually they want to escape from France to go to either England or Australia or Canada or the US, because it's more free than France. So a lot of people of all origins, it includes white, they want to live in liberal or libertarian, here it's in a very vague sense, in classical liberal white societies where there is individualism, free speech, respect for private property, separation of religion and state, progress, science, free market, the values of the West over the past 3 centuries, one might say. Whatever people say, when you look at what they do when they travel and when they move and when they migrate, people of all origins, predominantly they want to settle and live in these kind of societies. These are the most attractive societies. And Mises, that's not how he formulates this, but basically it can be interpreted as like this: societies which have embraced liberalism in the classical sense, in today's 21st century word, that would be libertarianism. Classical free society. They are the most attractive for a lot of people, and there are really a lot of Jews who want to escape from Jewish tribalism and to live as individuals in free, individualistic, liberal societies. Mises was one of them because they are aware of the greatness of the amount of opportunity, opportunity for achievement, prosperity, either material or simply in terms of security, of opportunity that it offers. Yeah. What I've been trying to express basically is that there are a lot of people who would like to live in the classical white societies before white societies have turned into some sort of a welfare redistributionist, decadent, insane mental asylums, one might say. Yeah. The classical ideal of liberalism, which has been embodied historically predominantly in Western European societies and Anglo-Saxon populated societies. There have been successes in other parts of the world, like Japan, etc. But classical Western societies, it was, and in a way it still is, very appealing to a lot of people of all origins. Yeah. Also, about individualism, here I've been reading Human Action recently, so I wrote this afternoon, but I just share my thoughts. Individualism, precisely, it requires cooperation, social behavior, this is what I've been talking about when I mentioned civic virtue, and intellectual collectivism, which is a good form of collectivism, simply because liberalism, individualism, and rationality, they go hand in hand, and the individuals, they are sometimes accused of being selfish, egotistical, but actually no, because they believe they are not stupid. Mises was not an idiot. Individualist, here it's in the noble sense, precisely in a way, they are intelligent enough to understand that an individualistic society, here it's in a noble sense, can only function if all the individuals share in common certain set of principles, legislative, moral, sometimes religious principles, which requires a common shared and common language, which expresses itself through reasoning, debate, exchange of ideas. That's what I call intellectual collectivism. It's of course it's a little bit provocative, but actually no, because individuals precisely they understand that in order for an individualistic society to function, there has to be invisible ties, which from the material standpoint, this is the hidden hand, the invisible hand of the free market, the one Adam Smith mentioned, the harmonization of diverging individual interests. Everyone seeks his own interest, work only for himself, but actually he benefits the whole of the whole community, because if every person specializes into his own field of expertise in the market. He becomes best at what he does, and then he becomes a specialist who trades the products of his own labor against the production of other specialists, and the harmonization of all these individual, partly selfish motivated interests is the invisible hand, one might say. So that's for the material aspect. But society is not just a collection of economic agents. It requires a shared, a common culture in the broader sense, ethics, values, a sense of common ancestry, not necessarily biological, but at least a common history, one might say, common goals, common shared belief, either religious or moral or political. So it requires a society of individuals, in a good sense, requires a community of ideals, and this community can be realized through the mind, through the intellect, through reason. Yeah, that's the dialectic of the individual and the collective, the part and the whole, one might say. Yeah. And precisely what I've been talking about for more than 2 hours, I could reformulate this. A society of individuals requires, in order to function, civic virtue. I'm not a narrow-minded free market libertarian, precisely because a society cannot hold together just based on economics. But a collectivized society economically, whether through central banking, redistribution, or taxation, that cannot work either, because precisely economic collectivism leads to egotism, because people do not care about the public property because it belongs to everyone. That's why communism always fails. Yeah, but what I'm trying to express is that a society of free individuals requires something that people share in common more than just economic interest, and this in a broader sense is culture, but it has to be actualized also through civic behavior. That's what I've been talking about earlier with the marriage, etc., etc. I'm becoming a little bit tired, but I will just end what I intended to talk about briefly. Yeah, I've been reading recently Mises and Hayek, and I wrote Hayek and Mises really are intellectual heavyweights. I wrote Mitteleuropa is great. And I wrote American intellectuals that I've been used to reading. Here's a great book that I've been reading a few weeks ago, or the book by David Booth. American intellectuals. Those that I've been reading, most of them are scientists. In a way, they are more efficient, but they lack personality. That's not an accusation against them as individuals, but simply they are more a manifestation of a collective work, because science is a collective work, because of the intellectual collectivism that I've been talking about. Whereas European intellectuals, here it means continental Europeans, not anthropological, because Mises was a Jew, but Hayek and Mises, these are continental European intellectuals in the tradition of the intellectual European tradition of continental Europe. In a way, they have more personality, because precisely they are not scientists and empiricists as such. They really have a personality of their own. They are scientists in a way, in the sense that the science of praxeology developed by Mises is rigorous and it aims at apodictic certainty, as he calls this. That's the vocabulary of Kant. Yeah, so, but they are not scientists in a sense of gathering, collecting data, etc. But precisely here, that's in a good sense that they are more intellectuals in the noble sense than just scientists. And here I wrote a good joke. A good joke, yeah. That's because here, I just explained. I've been reading. Here's another example of what I call an American scientist. A lot of data. That's good. It's good. It's good empiricism, but yeah. But I've been reading. It's a book about the Hohenzollern, the aristocratic the German family which ended up dominating Prussia. Yeah, so over the past few weeks I've been reading Hayek and Mises a lot, and it has enabled me to rediscover to become aware of the greatness of continental Europe in terms of achievements. Sometimes it's good to remember how great we are. Here I speak as an aristocratic European of Mitteleuropa. Yeah, and I wrote a good joke. I mean, it's not a good joke, but the Anglo-Saxons, here that's my arrogant European aristocratic self who sometimes does a little bit of trash talking against the Anglo-Saxons. What the Anglo-Saxon, it includes the English and the Americans and the Canadian, etc. What the Anglo-Saxons call an intellectual or sometimes a philosopher, here in aristocratic old Europe we have a name for this. We call this a statistician. That's a good joke. No, yeah, that's really a joke for the intellectuals. No, but seriously, reading Hayek, I've started reading Hayek over the past couple of weeks. Thoroughly, when I say reading Hayek has really enlightened me and opened my eyes in a sense that for many years I've been used to reading a lot of Anglo-Saxon science, statistics, data, empiricism, hypothesis, facts, etc., etc. And just reading, I've been used to reading Anglo-Saxon scientists or German metaphysician, but reading what I will now call Mitteleuropa intellectuals like Hayek and Mises has made me realize how great someone like Hayek is. Whatever one thinks of his idea, I tend to agree with a lot of his idea, but he's really exceptional as an intellectual precisely because he's rigorous without the excesses or without the rigor, of course, of German metaphysics, but he's really rigorous and wise. Here it means the ability to interpret, not just to collect data or just to deduce, but to give meaning and to clarify. Hayek is not a scientist in the ordinary sense, making experiments, testing hypotheses in laboratory, etc. But the book, The Road to Serfdom, there are very few statistics, if not at all, like in the book of Mises. Very few, there are some facts which are being mentioned, but it's mostly theoretical, while being very intelligent, very enlightening, rigorous, clear, spiritual in the sense of a broad view of all the aspects of a society. It's really excellent. I've been surprised. I mean, I how should I explain it? I did not doubt this, but that's what I wrote. Hayek and Mises are really intellectual heavyweights, and the intellectuals like these in continental Europe, there are not many intellectuals of the caliber of Hayek, but the tradition of continental European intellectuals, I've just realized, here just a personal remark, I've just realized recently that how great, really, Mitteleuropa is, because the Anglo-Saxons have a tremendous admiration for Anglo-Saxon scientists. I owe them a lot of my knowledge, and empiricism is great when it's done by the Anglo-Saxons, and they are really competent, and they are brilliant, and they are efficient, and they are innovative, and they are great, of course. But continental European, it's not necessarily geographic in a sense that the spirit can travel to the US, for instance. There are American intellectuals who have a continental mindset in a way. It's really on a different level. Yeah, I've realized this really by reading Hayek. Like, here I speak really as an little bit, not arrogant, as a confident European aristocrat. We in Europe, we have really elites of a very, very high level, intellectual elites, and Hayek really is an exceptional intellectual. But intellectuals of the caliber of Hayek in the history of Europe, there are many, many, many more. Actually, Europe has been renowned, or it has tended to be forgotten in the modern world. But Europe, continental Europe, has produced, in a way, still does, maybe less frequently, but still does, exceptional intellectuals. And here I will praise the French. I don't do this very often, but France, there's a lot to say about intellectuals in France, historically or in the modern world. France tends to be a country where people, intellectuals, they talk, in a way, sometimes the French are too in love with the sound of their own voice to speak the truth. That's Ocelot in Metal Gear Solid 2 about the Americans, but here it's applicable to the French. A lot of French intellectuals, they tend to speak, but just for the pleasure of hearing their own voice or trying to impress their peers, and it tends to be a lot of times empty talk. It's not uninteresting, but it's kind of arbitrary in the sense that the French, they feel like they are too good. They are, in the sense, they are like the Germans. A lot of French intellectuals, they believe that they are too good to lower themselves down to the level of the Anglo-Saxons. Steven Pinker is Jewish, but that's an illustration. To the level of the Anglo-Saxons, who have to back up everything they say with statistics and facts and quotations and graphs and etc. etc. The French, they have this kind of arrogant view that through the sheer power of their speech, they don't need validation from empiricism. The Germans, they think like this, but the problem is, it's not a problem. The good thing is that the Germans, they kind of disregard empiricism. A lot of German philosophers, but they disregard empiricism, but then in their logical deduction and their systematic view, they are rigorous and serious. Leibniz, Kant, Fichte, Hegel, Schelling, Heidegger, etc. Even Nietzsche in a way. It's different with Nietzsche, but yeah, a lot of German philosophers, they are serious. Hegel, of course, yeah, serious intellectually, while being kind of disdainful sometimes towards empiricism, because it's the French, they are disdainful of empiricism like the Germans, but they do not have the rigor, the systematicity, the order, the discipline of mind of the Germans. They are more, in a way, poetic, in the sense of a verbal expression. Yeah. That's why I've understood this also. I have been so fascinated, and I am still so fascinated by the Anglo-Saxon scientists, because it's not empty talk, because what they say is backed up by data, rigorously, etc. Whereas in France, when you read books about sociobiology or economics, it's political most of the time, and the authors, they assert things that they do not back up So they just talk, and they have this aristocratic. Here it's really arrogance to believe they don't need to lower themselves down to the level of empiricism to validate what they say, and it's really a problem with a lot of French intellectuals. That's why I love the Anglo-Saxons so much, because they bring common sense, yeah. But here, someone like Hayek, in a way, that would be a perfect mixture of intellectual rigor, that would be the Austrian German aspect. It's pleasant, I wouldn't say pleasant to read, because here I cannot judge the literary quality because it's in English, but in a way Hayek is a complete intellectual, and that's what Europe, continental Europe, used to produce: intellectuals who were scientifically aware of the development of the sciences, who were intellectually rigorous, who were spiritual in a sense, the ability to grasp diverse determinations and to have a full view, while expressing themselves well, being well read, being educated. So people with a culture in the most noble sense. Here, if I had to trash talk a little bit the Anglo-Saxon, I would say the Anglo-Saxons, some of them, they have a method which is very efficient and very good, but a lot of them, they seem to have no culture. Here, that's the arrogant aspect of the Anglo-Saxons. Usually the arrogant, these are the Germans or the French, but sometimes the Anglo-Saxons, they can be arrogant as well. Where they say, culture, no, we are focused on pragmatic things which work, which are efficient, business, etc. That's the shopkeeper mentality of the English and the Americans. Of course, it's very good, the pragmaticism of the Anglo-Saxons, but the negative aspect is that they can be disdainful towards high culture or towards metaphysics. Here, that's the sin of the Anglo-Saxons. Yeah. And precisely, Europe, continental Europe, Mitteleuropa, has had a tradition, and here that's partly a praise for the French, for the Germans, and the Austrians, because Hayek was an empirical Austrian. Austria has had a tradition of producing great intellectuals, and continental Europeans, really, they are praiseworthy when they are really complete, perfect. It doesn't mean perfection in ordinary sense, but perfected intellectuals who have a full view, who are coherent, scientifically aware, who express themselves well, who have a high culture. There are very few intellectuals of this caliber, not very few, but relatively fewer in the Anglo-Saxon world than there is in Mitteleuropa. It includes Austria, Germany, France, etc. Yeah. And here I will praise a little bit the French. I don't do this very often, but the French intellectuals. I've been watching conferences recently, and the French, they are kind of backward. The French intellectuals are backward scientifically. A book like this does not even remotely exist in a country like modern France. So the sociologists, the economists, they tend to be backward. But France still produces great continental intellectuals, what I might say, namely people with a high culture and the ability to understand the world without referring overwhelmingly to empiricism, by grasping the spirit. In this sense, Hayek is spiritual, not because he talks about religion or spiritual. Here it's another word for philosophical. Yeah, philosophical intellectuals who talk about ordinary topics like economics, politics, legislation, but with a philosophical perspective. Yeah, the Anglo-Saxon intellectuals, the Anglo-Saxon scientists, a lot of them are not philosophical in this sense. They are just empiricists and statisticians. Yeah, so because here I've been praising Hayek, but I've been reading Mises as well. Mises was Jewish, but in the Austrian tradition, and Mises is an exceptional intellectual. He's a man of culture with philosophical insights while talking about bland topics like economics, one might say, but he does it in a very rigorous way while having a culture. He's really a great intellectual as well. Yeah. And then I wrote a few remarks about the remarks of Mises about polylogism, namely the idea which was already widespread in his day and still is even more today with cultural Marxism or the woke ideology or whatever, that there are several types of rationality for different groups of people. That's what he called polylogism, namely that there are many logics depending on the class, the race, or the group. He struggled intellectually against this by proclaiming the universality of reason, and here I tend to agree with Mises. There's just a classical rationalist view that reason is the same for all. There are no distinct, not on an individual level. There are more or less intelligent people, more or less educated, etc. There are people who can be psychologically deficient for genetic or psychological problems, but every rational agent ought to be able to grasp the same truth, because precisely if they are rational, they are universal. That's rationalism simplified. And polylogism, which originated in the view of Mises with the Marxist view that the logic is different depending on the social class to which the people belong, or according to the German National Socialist, depending on the race. There were different kind of logic depending on the various ethnic groups. Mises disagreed with this, and as a rationalist, one might say, I have to agree with Mises. Although speculative logic in a way is specifically German, but it includes within itself ordinary rationality. So yeah. And recently I've been rereading a little bit of Karl Marx and listening to communist intellectuals. Marx borrowed a lot of ideas from Hegel. I wrote Marxism in a way is just inverted Hegelianism. I hadn't read Marx for many years. Now I can read with the mediation of Hegel, and there are here I will be honest, there are important, relevant insights provided by Marxian sociology. It can be enlightening, but it's just, most of the time it's just an ideology which blinds its own followers because it's restrictive. Here I will not comment, but France, really, there are a lot of Marxist intellectuals in France, and there are important insights offered by a Marxian view of society, the importance of class determination. Marx did not invent this, but he brought the question of class struggle to wide audience, one might say. He made it as a very important point of his worldview, and in this sense it can be important. And here even someone like Hoppe acknowledges the class struggle is a relevant category or relevant tool of sociological analysis from a libertarian perspective, that the libertarians can learn a lot from some insights of Marxism. Even Hopper acknowledges this, but nonetheless, well, yeah. And here I will conclude with a few personal remarks that I have written. Mises says that human acting implies consciously or unconsciously having a scale of values, and I wrote some of the things that I value when I act: independence, whether material, emotional, psychological, intellectual, and or political; liberty, which is tied with independence; consistency; honesty. That's why I have revealed a lot of embarrassing aspects about me, and I have showed all the stages of my process up to this point. So I evolve, I improve, I gather new knowledge, I adapt, I change while trying to remain consistent to some underlying ideas. I value simplicity. Here the example is to appreciate walking or sitting outside, walking in the forest or in natural landscapes, appreciating sometimes just to look at the natural world. Here natural means not too urbanized. Yeah. Rural, that's a synonym. Reading good books, improving science. So simplicity, that's something that I value. Knowledge, work, and achievement, and self realization and fulfillment through work and effort. The growth of the mind, growing up and growing in terms of maturity, one might say, and psychic well-being. One of the motivations which still one of the purposes which motivates a lot of my actions is to feel good about myself. And in order to feel good about myself, I believe that I have to do good to others. My view of what is good as of now is to try to be responsible and to try to share knowledge with others. This is what motivates a lot of my decision, to try to share with others, because I can only feel good about myself, which is eventually what I seek, to feel good about myself, if I have the feeling that I'm making efforts to improve the life of others, or at least to offer them the opportunity, the tools to improve their life. Yeah. So there are important psychological insights which can be derived from this book. Yeah. And when I am not altruistic and disinterested when I do my civic virtue, simply because in order to feel good about myself, I need to feel that I am making efforts, that I am being consistent, that I can help others, not out of pure altruism, but simply because it's in my interest that as many people as possible, everywhere eventually, but in my immediate environment, be as responsible and autonomous as possible. That's what I've been working on, and that's what I continue to work on. So when I do this, which I've been doing on a daily basis for many months, it helps me to feel better about myself. That's the dialectic of the individual and society. The individual receives a lot of goods, not necessarily economic goods, but a lot of goods and opportunities from society, but he has to give back to society. But since society is composed of individuals, of acting individuals, by helping others, you help yourself, and by helping yourself, you help others, because the more competent, responsible, autonomous, and grown up you become, the more you are able to influence others for the better and to help others. That's what I've been working on. So yeah. I have been behaving like a social libertarian. Not a socialist, but a social libertarian. My view of libertarianism is social, not socialist, social and ecological. Yeah. And also, I know that I have been, and I have not been a very good psychologist I can be a great psychologist in terms of analysis of the motivations of others or my own psyche, but I have not a very high level of emotional intelligence. Sometimes I can be emotionally intelligent, but I struggle here, not in a good sense. I have to make efforts, and I try, but psychologically I can be a little bit autistic, I wrote. So I have been a poor psychologist, or I have had poor emotional intelligence. Some of the reasons that I've listed is autism, my scientific view, because science deals with abstractions, personal traumas, and also a Roman ideal of masculinity, of ancient Rome, where men did their duty in a way, but they were not, the Romans, they had many qualities, but they were not a very emotionally, I would say emotionally intelligent, but emotional intelligence or emotional availability is not the first quality that should spontaneously be attributed to the Romans of antiquity, of the Republic, the great Romans. Yeah, I'm not sure that they were very emotional in a way, or if they were, they did not express this as much as later areas in Western civilization, especially Romanticism would. So I struggle with emotions in a way. I try to improve. My way here, I will be emotional. I will end on an emotional note. My way of showing love for others, or at least if it's not love, appreciation or respect, can be a little bit clumsy or a little bit improper maybe, or it's not. What I've been working on for many months is to try to help others, which in a way it's a form of, I'm not sure it's a form of love, but it's a form of consideration, at least for others, by trying to help them. But I can be poor, I can lack emotional intelligence. I make efforts to improve. I in a way, when I behave responsibly towards others, I imagine kind of the father figure trying to behave in a good way to help others. So that's kind of a paternalistic or a paternal aspect, but I have a tendency to be very distant, and it can appear as being cold. I do not show my emotions. I'm not a very emotionally available, a very emotionally available person, I guess. I have emotions, but I don't think that men should show their emotion publicly. And I'm not sure that being emotional is the proper way of manifesting love or affection when you are a man outside of the private sphere. Yeah, maybe I have to improve, but yeah. And yeah, that's why women can be important for providing what sometimes men are incapable or unwilling or incapable of providing. And here I've listed a great ASMR content creator, Cherry Lorraine. She produces great videos to bring a psychological uplifting. I've been listening to some of her talks. They are really uplifting and they can help a great deal. All the self-talk, not self-talk, self-development and positive talk and encouraging people, being a coach or a psychological manager. I am quite poor on this. My way of communicating is to recommend good books, good authors, good videos, to give pieces of advice. But I have to improve on the psychological department. As of now, I can recommend great women who are more gifted with psychological insights in terms of interaction with others. Yeah. Okay, that's what I had to say. I will end the video here. I don't know when this will be published. I don't know when if someone watches this other than myself up to this point, when you will watch this. But I wanted to share my process over the past few weeks, months. I will continue to practice my daily routine as long as I think it enables me to help myself and help others, and I can only encourage others, whoever they are, wherever they are, to make efforts for themselves, but then for others as well. And the more people are willing and capable and encouraged and to work on themselves and on improving themselves and their surroundings, even share publicly on the internet, the more it will encourage others to make efforts, etc. So yeah, that's how I envision things as of now in the global village. Solving problems requires collective participation on the part of individuals. I've been gathering the knowledge, and I will continue to do so. I've been practicing what I believe is correct, and I can only testify and encourage others to act in a way which enable to find stability, psychological, social, political. Yeah. And the references that I've been sharing: Mises Institute, Ron Paul, Stephen Molyneux, Jordan Peterson, for reasonable, conservative, libertarian views. Yeah. And also, I am working on gathering knowledge and improving my communication skills, etc. But also maybe, I don't know how much time I will dedicate to this, depending on the circumstances, but I have the intention of maybe writing a book to synthesize a lot of my ideas, which change constantly while remaining consistent in the important trends. Maybe writing a book, because here I understood that in order to be acknowledged and respected, one has to acquire a status, and a lot of people who are interested in ideas, they still cling, and I don't blame them, because I do as well. They cling to the idea of producing a book. I'm not sure that I will. It was not my intention up until recently, but I've understood that what I share is changing, although it's consistent very often, but it's also very often changing. I share very complex ideas, sometimes very simple ideas as well, but my worldview is extremely complex, so I need maybe for myself and eventually for others to clarify, to simplify. So I have decided to dedicate a few hours each day, as long as I can, maybe to writing, to synthesize some of my ideas. Yeah. I will continue to work to try to find psychological balance, and yeah. Yeah. I will keep working. Work in progress.